name is Michael DiRaimo.
When did you first come to MCC?
I came here in August of 1983.
And how did you hear about the college?
It was quite accidental. I was living in Rhode Island, and I was an adjunct English teacher at a variety of campuses. And I was about to give up the ghost. I didn't think there'd be any kind of full-time employment for me as a teacher. A friend of mine who was living in Connecticut sent me an ad from the Hartford Courant, a paper I had probably never read. And he says, look, there's a community college somewhere in central Connecticut looking for a teacher of technical writing, and that's what I was teaching at the time. He sent me the ad. I applied for the job, and here I am.
What was your impression of the campus the first time you arrived here?
Well, when I first arrived here, I noticed that everything was taking place within prefab buildings, which I found out later was built in 1972. They were pretty well maintained. There was some nice landscaping. But I was so happy to have a full-time job in the academic world. The place looked like the Emerald City to me. I thought it was terrific. As I stayed here a little bit longer and found that we were teaching not just on the prefab campus on Bidwell Street, but we also had locations at the old Cheney Administrative Building on Hartford Road, which used to be called the Hartford Road campus. I found that kind of charming, being able to, I thought we had like a split campus. It was kind of interesting.
Now, were you interviewed by a search committee?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I remember, to this day, I remember my search committee. It was a very, very nice interview. It was very pleasant. They asked great questions. And, yeah.
What was the college like in the mid-1980s when you were beginning your career here?
In some ways, it isn't much different from it is now in terms of the students. We had a full range of students and student types and student abilities. Students with a variety of demands on them. It was the first time I really saw close-up people running from Pratt & Whitney third shift and making it to my 8 a.m. composition class. There was something kind of exciting and moving about that. We were small. It was manageable. It was a small, manageable campus. We knew each other quite well, and I thought there was a good spirit of fellowship and friendship here. We've gotten big now in the 90s, and especially now, and I'll walk the campus and sometimes not know any of the faces, not know the names of any of the faces I pass, and I know their faculty and staff, but I don't know them. But what was amazing is how well you could have gotten to know everybody.
Now, you had an office in Faculty East. Tell me about some of your colleagues who populated that building.
Faculty East was a fascinating place for a lot of reasons. We had two people who were very memorable to me. One was a fellow named John Gustafson, who taught here for years, and in fact, because Chuck Please was so gracious, after John's death, he instigated the creation of a writing award in John's name. John Gustafson, who taught English, was one of the funniest human beings on the face of the earth. And if you were having any kind of a day where you were feeling a little bit in the doldrums, you go to John, and he would say something totally off the wall, and he'd pick your spirits up. He was fun to hang out with. Another character was a delightful man named Larry Willard. Larry was quite senior. I'm guessing he might have even been in his 70s when I knew him. And he couldn't hear very well, couldn't see very well, but he was something of a gem here at the college because he was an associate editor of Yankee magazine, and he ghost wrote most of the pieces in Yankee. He was a terrific writer and a very, very fine poet and a great guy. We had some other characters here who I remember. My first English department chairperson was Art Cloutier, and I was reading a book one day in my office, and it was a book on boxing. It was called The Sweet Science by A.J. Liebling. And he walked by, he said hello to me, and then the next day I got this beautiful note from him taped to my door. and saying, let's go have lunch and let's talk about boxing. It's one of my favorite sports, and I love A.J. Liebling. That kind of stuff was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And as you know, one of the great things about Faculty East, we had partitions that did not go completely to the ceiling. So try as hard as we did, we still heard everybody's business. And I think that had the effect of bringing us a little bit closer, because you sort of caught on when the person next to you was having an awful day. And so you knew when to back off, not to be too pushy, when not to be too obnoxious. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Let's do a little name association. I'll say a name, and you tell me
Yeah.
the first recordable thing that comes to your mind. Frank DiRaimo.
Frank DiRaimo, Cowboy Frank. I gave him the nickname Lash LaRue. Frank DiRaimo taught English. He had a PhD out of UConn, taught American Lit. As a matter of fact, he taught the American Lit class that I have taken over the first half of the American Lit survey. Funny as can be, he always came in wearing a matching outfit, and it always had a little bit of a Western flair, and that's where the Lash LaRue business came in. He used to wear jackets that had fringe on them. He wore these rather expensive cowboy boots, bolo ties. But he was an Italian guy from the south end of Hartford in Wethersfield, so there was this little mismatch in culture that made it really quite interesting. And he was also a little bit befuddled about finances. One day he came in to see me, and he says, "Can you help me with this? I just got a statement, and I don't know what this means." And he showed me a statement from an investment company, and it had his name on it. And there was a gigantic 6-figure total at the very bottom. I said, "Frank, what the hell are you doing working here?" He goes, "Oh, well," he goes, you got to keep the wolf away from the door. I said, "You could keep an entire forest of wolves away from the door with all the money he had." He was great. He was quite eccentric. It used to take him forever to pick courses during English department meetings. He would pause and hem and haw, and he always ended up with exactly the same schedule, semester in and semester out. I had great fondness for Frank.
Who was the English professor who smoked cigars?
Paul Clark, P.O. Clark. He was a character. He was one of the most brilliant men I've ever met. And not only did he smoke cigars, but truth be told, he kept a little bottle of bourbon in the bottom drawer. And he always taught, I used to call him the second shift, because all of his classes were at night, because he ran a bookstore in the daytime called the Bibliolatry, which was located on Route 66 going out to past Marlboro. And it was a terrific bookstore. But anyway, he would come in, and he would go off to his 7 o'clock classes. Classes met from 7 to 9:50. I think he taught 4, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And he would go off rather florid of face. I'm sure he had a nip or two. And I have to confess that one time in the graduation line, I think it was my second graduation here, we all gathered in Paul's office and had ourselves a little bit of a snort. My favorite Paul Clark story, though, is he loved cigars. And he would smoke cigars just about anywhere. And we weren't terribly touchy about smoking restrictions back then. There was another faculty member on campus. Her first name was Susan. I don't remember the second name, last name. But she was a militant non-smoker. And we're standing outside in the graduation line. This must have been 1985. We're behind Faculty East in the great outdoors. And Paul Clark is smoking one of his cigars. And I think he smoked Moneymakers, the Connecticut wrapped tobacco, kind of pungent. And Professor Sue goes up to him and said, "Will you please put that cigar away? It's disgusting and it's making me sick." And he looked at her, and I think he had been into the bourbon, and he said to her, "Madam, must you always rear up on your maidenly dignity that way?" It was one of his finer moments, but that's a classic character that we had back then.
Okay. Mike McGonigal.
I just spoke with Mike. Mike was another wonderful guy. He and I would tease each other because we came from we're both Southern New Englanders who came from very different ethnic dispositions. I was a Providence Italian guy, and he was a Boston Irishman. So we would exchange barbs and quips with each other. Mike was a medievalist and quite interesting, had a terrific memory. And whenever I drew a blank on some author or some title or some line of poetry, Mike was the go-to guy. He's still around. I spoke to Mike on the phone not too long ago. I think he's approaching 70 or he's hit 70. And Mike was teaching part-time at UConn and enjoying the heck out of it. He was teaching a course in medieval lit and doing quite well.
Was he head of the MCC chapter of Saber?
Oh, you remember the MCC chapter of Saber. Yeah, a little background on that. As you know, Saber stands for the Society of American Baseball Research. And every now and then when we would sign our names, it's so customary to trot out your degrees in academia. No one can just sign their name. You have to put PhD or MA or some silly thing after it. We went through a period there when we signed our name, we threw at the end of our names any degree or certificate or affiliation that we ever dreamed of. We put after our names. To go back to John Gustafson for a minute, Professor Gustafson would sign his name, Professor John Gustafson, M.A., INF, that is infantry, and the third one was Cert Radio Shack, because he took one of those Radio Shack certification courses to learn basic programming. At one point, Mike McGonigal and I and a few others, we became baseball obsessed. We would talk about in our spare time would be baseball. So we considered ourselves to be sabermetricians, baseball researchers, and we would sign our names Saber, or we would sign our names President MCC Saber Club. It was just a great time.
Let me try one more. Roland Cherico.
Roland Cherico, what a talented man. A lot of laughs. His office was a shrine to himself. He had pictures of him himself. He had pictures of him playing the trumpet, which he played enormously well, or shaking hands with people who were Connecticut notables or with other musicians. He had so many darn talents. He could play the trumpet. I think he taught oral communications. I think he taught a little bit of journalism. When he did write, he wrote beautifully, but you rarely ever saw his prose. And he was a technological master. He knew everything there was about technology. And one time I went to his house, and I pictured him to be kind of a suave musician, bebop, cool cat kind of guy. And I went to his house one time. He invited me over for lunch. And there he was under the hood of a 1992 Honda, his hands really dirty, and he's fixing God knows what. Man of many, many talents.
Now, I understand you were the author of a book that's still in print, although hard to come by, called Minute by Minute. Minute
by Minute. Yeah, that goes back to the days where no one's feathers got ruffled that easily. We live in a hypersensitive age, and certainly a hypersensitive environment where we're always worried about whether our humor might trouble somebody. Minute by Minute is a book where, for the longest time, I wrote the minutes for the humanities division. And I didn't see any need to play the minutes straight. So whenever something would suggest itself as a kind of funny quip or a pun, we would put them in the minutes. And yeah, the book exists. I think it was Ed Hogan collected the minutes and I think bound them. And he gave a copy to the outgoing division director, Toby Mark, gave a copy to me, and I think there's one or two copies around. And it's nicely bound. It's hard bound. It looks almost like a Shakespeare quarto. And I suspect it's going to be archived someday and probably find its way down to the Library of Congress. But maybe I'm dreaming.
Now, you've been here more than 25 years.
Yeah.
And what are some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of?
That's a tough one for me. I hope I taught as best I could. I'm trying to think of specific things I might have done, and nothing comes to mind. I was one of these guys. I guess I always took the professional path of least resistance. I tried to do my job as well as I could do it. I don't know if this is an accomplishment, but I made some of the deepest friendships of my life here. And I found the love of my life here, Mariana, who also teaches English. I guess that's something of an accomplishment. I did, the usual service to the college things, but accomplishment? I'd have to think about that.
Well, I know you're very modest, but in terms of accomplishments, you are noted for the organizer of the first and only Thanksgiving turkey giveaway program.
Oh, the turkey giveaway program, yeah. That got me in a little bit of hot water, which could have been used to boil the turkey, by the way. But I thought it'd be great to stuff a bunch of mailboxes. And back then, the mailboxes were those metal lockers. And I stuffed a bunch of mailboxes with a notice. That's right, this is an accomplishment. With a notice that said, the state of Connecticut will once again be giving employees of Manchester Community College a free frozen turkey. Please pull your car to the back of the Low building was built, and deliveries, you can pick up your turkey between, let's say, 3 and 4. And I stuffed a handful of mailboxes with it. And sure enough, some people looked at it, and you could see their eyes light up. I don't have to buy a turkey this year. As I recall, the Dean of Administrative Affairs, who was fairly new at the time, I think he got wind of it and wasn't too happy about the fact that some people were circling the back of the Low building looking for a butterball. But that was fun. That was fun. Doing public jokes, I think, a nice ways to bring communities together, to bond people. You can't do too many of them. You got to be careful how you do them. But I think it's part of the folklore of the culture, and I think it's fun to do.
Well, but weren't you also involved in the hiring of one of the deans?
Yes, we had a dean. This was an April Fool joke, and we were just speaking about this earlier. One April Fool's Day, we put out a notice. Brian Lombardo, I believe, was with us, and a few others. We made up a dean's position. We called it the Dean of Auxiliary Services, and we put out an April Fool's notice telling people that the college just hired a new Dean of Auxiliary Services, and we gave him a name like Dewey Naivete or something like that, and that there was going to be a cheese and cracker and wine reception for him. Come and meet the dean in the cafeteria between this time and that time. Well, there was no dean, there was no Dewey Naivete, and there were no cheese and crackers, but there's so many people full of goodwill. I'm sure they were lining up outside the cafeteria on that day at 2 o'clock waiting to meet the new dean. Yeah.
On a more serious note, if you were talking to someone who has just been hired to begin his or her career teaching at MCC, what advice would you impart to that person?
Oh, I think the advice would have changed over the years. If I were to speak to someone right now, I would tell them, do the best you can, that the classroom, no matter how much you want to romanticize it, is awash in people of various abilities, and sometimes it'll seem absolutely frustrating and impossible. Other times you'll feel some degree of achievement. Don't make your job your life, I tell them. I think one thing I've noticed at MCC since 1983 is there is a kind of aggressive work culture here where people tend to make their jobs their lives. They make the institution their lives. And I think that that's not always a good thing. I think that's not a good thing. And I would say be careful that the institution doesn't grab too much of your time and energy. Try to focus on the classroom and keep it simple. Keep it simple. We live in an age of hyper-professionalism. Everybody is going to conferences and getting this degree and that degree, thinking that all of this accumulation of new knowledge is going to make them that much better. I'm not sure it does. I'd say keep it simple. Do the best job you can. Get home. Get your 8 hours of sleep. And spend time with your family.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Something or some individual who we've not covered?
Yeah, there's a couple of people who have been a real comfort to me. I want to mention my wife a second time because she's never content with my mentioning her just once. So I want to mention her a second time. Being with her at the college has been terrific. I don't know if it's appropriate to do this, but you, my interviewer, you have been enormously helpful to me because you, Mr. Interviewer, you enabled me to teach a course in Introduction to Film at a time when I was just growing really tired of teaching just my English courses, and I had a background in film, and you trusted me, and you let me teach that course, and it's a wonderful break from just teaching straight composition and literature. I had a very, very good relationship with President Jonathan Dalby when I was here. He was always very kind to me and attentive to me. And he handed me a lot of challenges that I normally wouldn't seek. He probably sensed that again, as I said earlier, I'm a path of least resistance kind of guy. But every now and then he would put some resistance in my way just to make me work that much harder. And he was always very, very kind to me, particularly when my health was in distress and my family was in distress. And you know, the bad thing about naming names like this is I'm going to forget people. I'm trying to think historically.
Well, maybe Doc Richardson. We haven't touched base.
Oh, my God. We should say that. Doc Richardson, yeah, he's living up in Maine now, and he's a courageous fellow. He's been through multiple bouts of bad illness, and he's doing really, really well, last I heard. He was an interesting man. He was an ex-Marine, a Princeton PhD, who wrote about Tennyson's Idyls of the King. And he wrote like a bird of paradise. The man could write prose like I never saw. Had a terrific sense of humor. And he was a great supporter of mine when I first came here. When I would hit the skids in the classroom or feel like I was hanging by a thread professionally, I'd go into his office, and he could offer some of the best words of comfort and optimism for me. And I miss him. I miss him terribly.
You know, speaking of English professors in film, Marsh Elmore.
Marsh Elmore, yeah. I feel bad I've grown out of touch with him. Marsh was the first faculty member full-time to invite me out for dinner at a house. The first house I was in of anybody who lived in this area was Marsh Elmore's. And he was wonderful to talk about film with. And I inherited, after he retired, his film and literature class. And he was a real guiding light for me, too. He looked at my syllabus once after he retired, and I had made some modifications of what he did. And he really called my attention to the fact that some of the things I was modifying was not going to work. And I went ahead with my syllabus the way it was. Sure enough, Marsh was dead on. What I wanted to do in that film and lit course didn't work. And I went back to borrowing some of his techniques and approaches.
Anyone else?
Oh, I'm sure there's a million other people, but I can't. Toby Mark, and I don't know if you know this, but I once stretched her shoes. Let me tell you what that means. Toby was a great division director. She taught Spanish, and she became our division director in liberal arts and communications. And she was flamboyant, to say the least, and quite fashionable. And she would walk around talking about the killing she made at the Cahoes store up at the Enfield Mall, I guess it was, or wherever the hell Cahoes was at the time. And she would trot out her latest, most flamboyant outfit. One day she had a pair of shoes on, brand new shoes, small heel, I'll remember. Found them rather tasteful and nice. But they were designed like taxi cabs. They're called taxi cab shoes. And she was walking around, and she was barefoot. And I said, Toby, you just showed me your new pair of shoes. Why are you barefoot? She says, they're too tight. She says, would you walk around in them for me and stretch them out? So I'm walking around a pair of yellow taxi cab shoes and trying to stretch them out. That might be my greatest achievement you asked me about a while earlier. I stretched out my division director's shoes. And then at one point, I'll never forget, she conducted a division meeting wearing an outfit. And she was always very sharp. I mean, there was a little bit of funkiness and a little bit of eccentricity, but she always was really well turned out and a lot of fun. One day she conducted a division meeting wearing a jacket and skirt. And the jacket, instead of having buttons, had faucet spigots, the four-pronged faucet spigots that said hot, cold, hot, cold. And so in the division minutes, I mentioned that she was wearing spigot wear to the division meeting. But she was great. And every now and then, we will talk on the phone. I miss her.
Anything else that we should discuss? That's a wrap.
Thank you.